about them Irish?
I can't take it anymore. I need a national championship.
This is the Four Horsemen Podcast.
And we are back. Welcome, listeners of the Four Horsemen Podcast. I'm Dylan, not joined by Steve or P-Wagon today. Those guys have been fired. Not actually, but they're busy. So I've been joined by two guests. This is going to be a special podcast where in the first half, we're going to talk about conference realignment and Notre Dame's potential move to the Big Ten. And then afterwards, because this is the dog days of summer, we're going to get into a little bit of history, talk about where programs stand all time. And to join me for this, we got Eric Wallace, E-Dub on Twitter, Michigan State fan. I'm sure you guys have seen him by now. We only tweet and retweet each other all day. And then we got Kenneth Jones, Goat Finder, at an Alabama fan on Twitter, who I'm sure you guys have also seen by now. Super knowledgeable guys, just kind of like us, super fans, got lots to say, and I figured, why not? It's the middle of August. Let's have some fun. So I'll start with you, Eric. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience and say whatever?
Hey, what's going on, Notre Dame fans? Thanks for having me. First of all, I can't wait for you guys to join the Big Ten. Let me tell you what, I will be waiting on your doorsteps with a giant gift basket from the state of Michigan. I'll have a big, big giant basket of Coney dogs for you. It's the Michigan specialty here. So when you guys get here, we'll have a grand old time, maybe $100 million a year or something, but maybe we'll get more into that as the show goes on. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to get the show started, though.
Absolutely. Kenneth, do you want to do the same?
Hello, my name is Kenneth, of course. Yeah.
I love it. Short and sweet. The Alabama fan doesn't have to say much because he lets the ring show it for himself, right? That's how it goes. So yeah, it's great to see you guys visually, but also have you on the show. Let's get into it. Conference realignment. What the hell is going on? Why is our sport being ruined, or is it not being ruined? Eric, I'm going to let you have the first shot there because it's your conference that's currently under the spotlight.
It's, I guess it depends who you talk to. I am kind of old school. I personally don't like it. I liked it the way it was before even Nebraska came to the Big Ten. I like the old Big 12. I like the old Pac-10. I liked it when the Big East was still a real football conference. So every time I see a new conference realignment shift, I kind of cringe. I really cringed last summer when it was Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC. Since then, I've kind of wrapped my head around it and gone, well, it's kind of a geographical fit, but the culture fit still just to me isn't there because it's still to me Big 12 country just going to the SEC. To me, it's just all it is these two conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC, just widening the gap and leaving everyone else in the dust. And eventually, and obviously we'll get more into it, but like we're discluding USC, UCLA, and then you're going to eventually see, we're going to disclude Notre Dame for obvious reasons, but like there's going to be a lot of really fun college football programs down the line, like Washington State and their like fun offenses. There's a lot of fun ACC matchups There's just fun Big 12, high scoring, high flying games, and Pac-12 after dark. Like that stuff at one point mattered. And now I just don't know like where that's going to all fall when these two, what eventually looks like it's becoming a super conference, just like spreads itself out and just, and to me, I'm looking at like a program, for example, like Oklahoma State. Like Oklahoma State's been a damn good program for the better part of 15 years under Gundy, 20 years. They've been a 10-win program how many times? They've they're now going to be financially and woefully behind schools like Rutgers and Vanderbilt and Purdue. And to me, that just doesn't make sense. But that's just where the sport's going, because it's all about what does this fan base draw to what's the almighty dollar. Like I could make a case today, and this isn't how it works, but I could make a case that you could take Rutgers out of the Big Ten, throw Oklahoma State in there, and it'd be more valuable. But you're not taking teams out to put other teams in. You could say the same thing about Oregon, Washington, and we haven't even gotten to like the ACC and all the other programs that are there. They're just untouchable right now. So I just think it's a giant mess. And the only thing at the moment that's kind of lynching it all together is you guys, is the way I see it. Because if Notre Dame doesn't move right now, it kind of stays status quo. And if Notre Dame does move, it kind of lends itself to more movement coming down the line. And I think that obviously it would make for really compelling Big Ten matchups, but it could really fracture the sport as a whole down the line if you're just a fan of college football. And I don't know. As the old school fan, I'm not a giant fan of that at all.
Yeah, I think that's the reality that we're coming to, is Notre Dame's kind of the glue that, or at least the last straw that could break the camel's back here. Kenneth, I want to get you in from an SEC perspective. How do you feel about Oklahoma and Texas joining the conference, and do you feel partially responsible for the death of college football?
No, not at all. The bell was rung when Nebraska left for the Big Ten. I think that's when things started to shift this way, and that's when all this stuff became inevitable, where conferences would be fighting each other for power until there's a winner. Not sure how that's going to end up, but yeah.
I could make the case that a lot of this conference realignment was going on a long time ago, because you had, Notre Dame and Penn State and South Carolina and I think West Virginia and I think how many other independents, and then you had even
Florida
like
State.
Arkansas, Florida State, thank you, and then you had like Arkansas in the Southwest Conference, and you had all this other realignment going on in the late 80s, early 90s that was TV driven at the time. And it wasn't TV driven the way it is now, but there was a lot of shifting going on then too. But I think a lot of stuff kind of stayed status quo from like, the mid 90s through that, Nebraska move. And the Nebraska move, I think, was kind of more Texas's fault than anything. I think that whole Big 12 shifting around dynamic back in the late 2000 or early 2010s was more Texas pissing everybody off with the Longhorn Network and demanding larger revenue shares. And because I think there was, if I remember right, there was a real possibility that all those bigger programs in the Big 12 were going to possibly leave for the Pac-12, and that was going to become the Pac-16, and that was going to be like the first real super conference, which would have thrown the whole sport off before, the real super conferences we're seeing now. And somehow the Big 12 kind of glued it all together by, weird revenue sharing, the Longhorn Network, Texas, and and at that point, Texas A&M was like, "Yep, we're done. We're not doing this." Nebraska's like, "Yep, we're out of here. We're not doing this anymore either." And eventually, you just started seeing an exodus of programs. Colorado got out of there, Missouri got out of there. So, I think that was a lot of Texas just kind of pissing off everybody in the neighborhood. So, but this is, realignment's been going on for a long time. And you could argue that, like Penn State was an independent for a really long time, and they only made the move because they needed to find reliable television partners, and the Big Ten gave them that. They've never been a true cultural fit in the Big Ten. They've always wanted a more East Coast presence in a very Midwesterny regional type conference. Nebraska going to the Big Ten was the biggest mind-blowing weirdness that I remember.
Well, from what I understand, like the NCAA is pretty weak to begin with in what it enforces, but then you have kind of a deregulation of the sport. You have NIL, and then you have the media companies owning the conferences. And that's basically put all these market pressures into action, and this is where we are now. Something I wanted to ask you guys, and I don't know, maybe I'm thinking about this too narrowly, but if part of the issue these programs are leaving, right, Texas and Oklahoma leaving the SEC, UCLA and USC leaving to the Big Ten, is because they're not getting paid their fair share, and they have to split them equally with all the other useless conference members. What's to stop that being the issue with the super conferences? Like if we end up in a two super conference league, what's going to stop Alabama from saying, why am I sharing my revenue with Vanderbilt, or Ohio State to say the same thing about Purdue? I feel like this is almost a self-cannibalizing cycle here of equal revenue sharing. Am I wrong, or is that less of a concern for you guys?
I won't speak. Sorry, Kenneth, go ahead.
All right. I think there are too many big programs, or at least there definitely will be too many big programs in each of the conferences for that to happen. I think Alabama on their own probably aren't going to make as much as they would sharing money with Florida, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma. I think it's going to be a bigger money move to stay in the conference at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and Ohio State and Michigan in the Big Ten are really the big money makers. And then you've kind of got like that next level in the Big Ten with like Penn State and now USC, UCLA. The next level you've got, your Iowas, Wisconsins, Michigan States, but all of those are giant money makers as it is. And I feel like, at this point, I guess to your point, is there really anything stopping them? No. But right now at this juncture, everybody is going to be making so much damn money, and they're going to be the highest paid conference. Like they're going to be making upwards of like $40 to $60 million a year more for each team than schools in the ACC and the Pac-12, the Big 12, or whatever's left of those conferences. So like at this point, are they really squabbling about like who's making more than who? Maybe I know that Gene Smith, the AD of Ohio State, has come out and said that he's not in favor of unequal revenue sharing, then for whatever that's worth. He's kind of one of the two big power brokers of, the Big Ten, the other one being Kevin Warren himself. So, I mean, if he's on board with equal revenue sharing, I'm sure that'll stay that way. So he has as much of a leg to stand on to ask for unequal and get more than anybody else in the conference, I would think. So,
yeah, that's a good sign. My favorite fact or statistic that has come out of this realignment is the fact that USC now has the most Big Ten Rose Bowl victories.
Basically a home game for them, so I mean, not surprising.
True. Yeah, there's something about USC that you really want them. I want that fan base to come back. It feels like they've been really diluted ever since all those LA sports teams moved in, and that's kind of taken the shine off.
The most
it's about the
fan base.
I don't know if you heard, Tuck coming. So there's going to be plenty more Rose Bowls for Michigan State. They'll pass USC. Don't worry about it.
Well,
that is if they don't keep making national championships. Sorry.
Right. No, that's fair. We all know Michigan State's the next big power in college football.
That's right. Yeah.
I do love Mel Tucker, though. I think that was such a great hire. And I hope Michigan State can keep it up, because when Michigan State's good, that takes away from Ohio State in recruiting. That takes away from Michigan in recruiting. That takes away from Penn State in recruiting. Like, it's good to have more competition in the Midwest. As a Notre Dame fan who hates those other programs, but let's this is kind of a Notre Dame show, and I'm sure our listeners want to understand what the hell is going on here and why Notre Dame, after 132 years of independence, is contemplating joining a conference. And you talked about revenue and why that matters is not just because that goes into facilities and coaching and all that kind of stuff. We're heading towards paying players. Like, we are that close to it. There's going to be some kind of unionization effort going on. There's going to be revenue sharing with the athletes. And that's where the revenue issue is a big deal, because if you're not making that top dollar, you can't afford to pay recruits or your players as much. And then you're a less attractive destination just by default of how this is going to work. You just have less money. And I hate that, because I'm going to miss Pitt versus BC. And, there's going to be some good programs in there. Like, TCU, Baylor, what happens with them? Is the SEC really going to be interested in those schools? Potentially, because you get into the Texas market, but you just did with UT. So I'm not sure. Kenneth, you're not a Notre Dame guy, but your history. What do you think is the trajectory here? Do you have a position on where Notre Dame should go, or would you just kind of defer to whatever we decide?
From an outsider point of view, it seems like joining the Big Ten would be their best option. I think I mentioned this in that space you held, but there's the tradition of being an independent, but there's also the tradition of playing Michigan and Michigan State and Purdue. There's all those rivalries that you don't play as often as you maybe would like to. So it seems like the best move to me.
Yeah. Boy, I'm torn on this one. As a State fan, I'm biased. I would love them to join just so the rivalry would start again. But I don't know. There's just something unique about like independence in Notre Dame for me. I don't know. It's going back to that, like having the traditional college football again. And I would like to ultimately for Notre Dame, I feel like that's going to be and I preface this by saying I have no idea what they're going to do. And like, I hear people talk about this all the time. I know that you and I have talked about this privately. It's like, you get the proponents of, people wanting Notre Dame to join the Big Ten, like really hardcore, like, oh, Notre Dame's going to fall behind, Big Ten money machine, burr, 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 cash. And it's like, I don't know, like, as long as they have, there's a lot of other stuff that goes into it. They may still end up joining, but I think the big thing they have to think about, do they have a pathway to the college football playoff? And in case everybody seemed to forget, that's still going to be expanding. And it sounds like everybody, at least it seems like there's going to be plenty of at-large bids. And it seems like that's going to be even a larger pool of at-large bids now. At least the Big Ten's talking about that now. So I mean, that bodes really well for Notre Dame to be a 2-loss at worst team. They probably have a seat at the table with their schedule. And, if they can be, if they can have a seat at the table in an expanded playoff, and they can, and then the other side of it is they have to have a new NBC contract that comes up that doesn't make them fall behind financially from what their counterparts like Michigan and Michigan State and Ohio State are doing in the Big Ten.
Can I jump in there just real quick to summarize for the audience? Notre Dame, as athletic director Jack Schwarbrick has said, there's 3 pillars to Notre Dame's independence that would have to crumble for Notre Dame to join a conference. There's one, a national media partner. That's never going to be an issue. As far as I'm concerned, people will always be televising Notre Dame. 2, there's access to the playoff, which is what Eric's been talking about. And on this one, I actually think that's not going to be an issue because we had this very unholy alliance last year between Greg Sankey, the I don't know what you call them in the conference, the conference chairman leader,
the commissioners,
the commissioner of the conference, Greg Sankey of the SEC, and Jack Schwarbrick, athletic director at Notre Dame, were working together to get a 12-team expansion playoff, which would, as Eric said, basically guarantee Notre Dame a spot at the table with a 10-2 season. So that's not going away. And with things being as they are now, Sankey said, we had 4 automatic bids for the other conferences. I don't think we're going to do that anymore. I think we're going to have 12 at-large bids. And that's even better for Notre Dame because under the old proposal, which we endorsed, we would never have been able to get a bye, even if we were the number 1 team in the country. So there's that. And then the big one that Eric's getting to, and I'll lead it back off to you here, is the financial competitiveness. And that's the really big issue here because for the folks who don't realize at home, the Big Ten has just secured a huge media rights deal with Fox Sports, who owns over 60% of the Big Ten network. And they got tier 2 deals with NBC and CBS. So they're going to be on noon on Fox, 3:30 on CBS or NBC, and then 7:30 on CBS or NBC. And this deal is going to kind of dwarf the SEC's deal with the ESPN. So the money that Purdue and Indiana and Illinois are going to make are going to dwarf Notre Dame's. And that's where we're getting to. And that's where I'm going to kind of pass it off to Eric and let him finish his thought there, because that is a really big issue.
Oh, it's a huge issue for Notre Dame. And but this is kind of, there was a report about, I don't know, there was about a month ago now, but Notre Dame was looking for $75 million to stay independent from NBC. And I think, to me, my brain is saying that number seems kind of high. Like, even with shoulder programming, that number still seems kind of high, but I do think, aim high, you can maybe fall short. Notre Dame realizes that you're not going to be independent, you're probably not going to get to the exact same number that all the Big Ten schools are going to get. You just need to make sure that you're not at that, because what's the number now? 15 million? Is that what Notre Dame's getting in their NBC deal?
I think it's around 22, plus they're getting 10 out of the ACC for the other sports. So Notre Dame is about 30 million, I think, total, which is nothing. Like the NBC deal, we're asking to go from 20 million a year to 75 for only 7 home games. That's what's crazy.
Yeah. And and with all due respect, and this is not taking away from Notre Dame's brand whatsoever, there's not a television network in the world that's going to pay $75 million for anybody's home games, like that, 7 home games. That's just a lot of money. But can they get 50 to 60? Maybe. And that's what Jack Swarbrick's getting at. It's like, can we get ourselves so we're financially afloat and not falling that far behind the Big Ten every year? Because that's got to be a component to us retaining our independence. If we can get that financial part figured out, if we can get that access to the college football playoff figured out, maybe the independence thing can still work. I don't know if that's going to be enough still. Maybe enough people are like, well, hey, look, USC's now in the Big Ten. It's a national conference. I know Brady Quinn has come out and said, look, It's a national conference now. You've got New York, Chicago, LA, USC's there, all your other rivals like Michigan State, Purdue, and even Michigan, if you even give a damn about playing them anymore, they're there. Like, what else do you need? It's going to be with the Big Ten payout and the huge media deal, like close to, if not more than $100 million a year. What is there to think about? I that's a decision Swarbrick has to make, and one I'm glad I don't have to make.
It's tough, and he's at the end of his tenure, and this is going to be the last major thing he does, and I don't envy that at all. Yeah, it's like you said, it's a tough situation for Notre Dame to be in. Ken, I wanted to ask you your thoughts here because I don't know how into conferences or realignment you are, but the understanding is the SEC really doesn't want Notre Dame to join the Big Ten because that would create an even larger financial gap than that's already being created. Not necessarily a competitive gap because the SEC is still by far the best conference on the field. I think that is kind of narrowing, and I think Notre Dame going to the Big Ten would even that out a bit. But it's weird that despite being the best, conference, that the money isn't number one. So is this a concern for you? But at the same time, you're an Alabama guy, so like, who cares what other people do, right? You guys are the kings of the sport at the moment. So I'm curious to hear what your perspective is.
Money makes the world go round. I'm sure every SEC team and everybody who's working with the SEC, want to make more of it. I'm not exactly sure. There's a lot of projections and stuff going around. The SEC will make this much by this year, and the Big Ten will make this much by this year. A lot of them have the SEC slowly catching up to the Big Ten, but we can't really know for sure. I don't think there's going to be a gigantic gap like there currently is and currently seems to be. So I'm not really concerned about the money for the poor old SEC.
I think they would trade in the making, $10 or $15 million a year less, knowing that they have more seats at the college football playoff that's expanded. And I don't think Bama fans really care as long as they're still winning every other college football playoff championship every other year at worst, if not every 2 years.
Yeah, the rest of the teams can drown financially for all we care.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Yeah, they're more concerned about what the heck happens when Saban leaves, if and when that ever happens.
We found the fountain of youth. He's never going to leave.
Yeah, I'm sure they've somehow taken their financial stake from the SEC and found a machine to keep him alive for another 50 years.
Yeah, I think that's great. That was such a Notre Dame answer there too. Like, I don't care what the other teams make. Like, let them sink, right? Like, that's always my mentality. So I don't care what the other programs do. As long as Notre Dame's winning, which we haven't. So that's been a big issue. Yeah, Nick Saban's going to live forever, and I hate that because I think he's already the greatest coach of all time, especially in the era he's done it in. I don't really think that's really up for debate. Although, Kenneth, you've got a few guys you could pick from there in the Alabama history. So would you say Saban's number one?
It is an extremely tough debate because Bear Bryant, of course, won everywhere he went. He won at Kentucky somehow. He got them their first SEC championship. He won at A&M. He won at Alabama. Saban only really started winning when he went to the SEC. Bear Bryant has the longevity, but Saban has the peak dominance, the dynasty. Plus you're comparing across eras. Bear Bryant could have anywhere between 4 and 10 national championships, while Saban has like a true national championship game. So it's really tough. I think I'd rate Saban the best, but it's really tough to tell.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, Eric, you've got an expertise on Nick Saban as well. I can't even believe he coached up north. That's kind of mind-blowing to me, just with how in the South he's been the last 20 years.
Well, he really helped Michigan State for a very brief period in the late 90s, from kind of the doldrums of the early 90s, turning it around. He did not have today's Michigan State is really invested with a couple of really high powered billionaires that are really invested in not just Tucker, but the entire athletic department, especially football. They did not have that level of investment or care of investment back then. And when Saban wanted something, he wasn't getting that. And it was going to be impossible for him to overcome what Michigan had, what Ohio State had, because back then it was the big two and the little eight or little nine. So he found greener pastures at LSU and he went, and that's actually a kind of a sad story because he actually went and he thought his assistants were going with him. And when he got to the airport in Baton Rouge to meet his assistants, the plane landed and none of his assistants were there. If you ever read his book, it was a very tearful moment for him. Not to get too far down
Don't
the
humanize him.
history.
Yeah,
right.
Don't humanize
Yeah.
that guy. Let him be evil, okay? Don't make him likable at all.
Darth Saban.
Can I share my favorite Alabama coach is what's it? Joe Kimes. Is that his name? The guy that was the coach before Saban took over, the guy who coached the bowl game.
Oh, you mean like Ed Ogeron Jr., the guy with the
crazy voice?
Yeah.
Oh my God. That whenever I saw that, when that guy had his halftime speech, I remember watching that in college and I was like, oh my God, this guy's gold. He won't be the coach ever again in college football, or at least not in high level college football. But if I could listen to this guy talk, I would pay money to listen to this guy talk for the rest of my life.
Podcast.
Yes. Yeah. We should get Joe Kimes on the show.
Something I wanted to ask you guys both, because it is relevant to conference realignment a bit. How do you see Oregon? Like, what do you see when you see Oregon? Because I'm not from the West Coast. I don't really know. But my perception of Oregon isn't particularly high, and I don't hate them or anything. I don't want them to come with me to the Big Ten if we were to go. Like, what do you guys, do you view that as a program with value? Are they a top of the wish list kind of program, or what's going on?
I'll let Kenneth start.
If they're anything like Washington fans, which Washington seems to be like second on that list, they've got to be a little uncertain about their future, considering how the state of the Pac-12 and stuff, and not being sure whether the Big Ten would take them or not. I think they certainly are in like the best position of all the non-Notre Dame teams that aren't in the SEC or the Big Ten. But they've got to be unsure about themselves, unsure about the future. That has to be the feeling around the program.
Yeah, they're one of the ones out. They're one of the ones that is a really interesting case because they've got a pretty good program. They're pretty competitive. I know they haven't been like college football playoff competitive as of late, but they have made the national championship, I think, twice over the last 12 or 13 years. One of those years was Marcus Mariota year and the first year of the college football playoff. That's a program that has a lot of investment into it with obviously the Nike money, but it's not just football. They've got some really heavy investment into all of their athletic facilities too. They really love their athletic programs up there. And it's a program where the football team is interesting enough that people will watch, but it's not a fan base, I don't think, that's ginormous enough like that moves the needle like an Oklahoma or a Texas or a USC. So it's a program, I think, that, and I'd kind of get into this, I don't know, maybe in a minute, but like in a scenario where Notre Dame were to join, Notre Dame's going to bring enough value to the Big Ten where you're not subtracting the pie pieces. You're actually making the pie pieces a little bit bigger. So if you're adding another team, if that other team or that other university is their pie piece is a little bit smaller. It's actually not subtracting everybody else's pie piece overall. It's actually just kind of a net neutral. So you could add Oregon and it wouldn't kill everybody else's pocketbooks. If you're just looking at this from the revenue, which is what the conferences are doing. If I'm adding it, I see them as being the most, like from a West Coast perspective, I see them being the most competitive right now and probably long-term just because of the investment into the program. From the Big Ten's perspective, I think more interesting to them, especially if Notre Dame were to come along, would be Stanford. And I think the reason Stanford would be more attractive, Stanford brings along more California ties for the other California schools. Stanford does have some history with Notre Dame. Stanford, I think, would, this is probably silly. I don't know that this would be a needle mover just for the conference, but I guess maybe a little icing on the cake. I think there's a little Big Ten nation wants a Stanford Northwestern rivalry. And more than anything, if you're going to bring along Notre Dame for the absolute football prowess that it brings, you're bringing along Stanford for its academics because its endowment and the research dollars that it brings with its AAU accreditation would be something that the Big Ten presidents would jump head over heels for. So if you're adding another West Coast school to go with Notre Dame, my gut feeling would be it'd be Stanford, though I would think the more competitive and probably more compelling program would be Oregon.
Well, I was kind of joking with a USC fan saying, like, how hilarious is it that Stanford's future might entirely depend on what Notre Dame does? But then I realized Stanford's in the Bay market, right? That's the TV markets are kind of what's driving this. They're in the Bay Area. Oregon, if you want to be generous and give them Portland, is not really a big market. It's not huge. I think it's 19th in the country. San Francisco area is 6th, I believe. There might be a reason to take Stanford without Notre Dame, because like you said, the presidents and the chancellors there would love to have them. The endowment's massive. Look, they've been the best team in the Pac-12 in the last 20 years. They're awful right now, but they've been really good in certain pockets. So if I'm the Big Ten, I mean, Notre Dame or no Notre Dame, I might just go Stanford over Oregon anyway. I see value there, but that's partially because I do like Stanford. Something I wanted to ask you guys. Maybe better suited for Eric, but this could be at the end of this discussion. So if you have anything else you want to say first, maybe I'll let you go, because I kind of want to end on your pitch to Notre Dame fans on what you could offer as a representative of the Big Ten.
I would add the most desirable school after Notre Dame is not in the Pac-12, in my opinion. It's in the ACC. And there's a reason why, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know about the troubles of why ACC is not getting picked apart. It has to do with the grant of rights there and the horrible deal that all the ACC schools signed. They're out till like the year 2036. So they can't get out of it without paying some substantial, like over 240 million dollar fee or something to get out of it, which is just tying them to the ACC, which is holding the ACC together. But if I were a betting man, I bet if that grant of rights could somehow get figured out, I bet this is actually something Kenneth probably maybe would agree with, maybe not. I bet the number one team that could get picked off by both the ACC and SEC and the Big Ten would be North Carolina. I think there's a tremendous amount of value. I know they're not the powerhouse football program, but as far as we all know, the Big Ten once added Maryland and Rutgers for money. and they bring jack shit to the conference from a competitive standpoint. North Carolina is at least holds their head above water, at least with football. They are a branding machine that also holds incredible academic value. I know there's going to be people out there joking about the academic scandal a few years ago, but like they also are in a state that neither the Big Ten or the SEC currently hold in one of the fastest growing states. And it also would get the Big Ten into a region of the country that is kind of in the SEC's backyard where there is some real football talent. There is a lot of value for the Big Ten to go get a flagship school like North Carolina down there. And oh, by the way, it also brings one of the premier basketball programs along with a lot of premier. If you could get Notre Dame and North Carolina at the same go, Big Ten would probably say, we're done. That's it.
Well, also North Carolina has two, I think, major TV markets. Like the state of North Carolina has two that they can kind of pick off of.
Exactly.
But Kenneth, I wanted your opinion from the SEC perspective. Let's say the ACC is dying. You have the Big Ten has struck first blow. You're commissioner of the SEC right now. Who are your top targets to go after?
Well, to me, it'd be Clemson and either Florida State or Miami. Those seem like the obvious choices. Regionally, it makes sense. Especially with Miami, you could get that rivalry with Florida back. It's plus the Clemson-Georgia rivalry. That's a big one. The South Carolina-Clemson rivalry could be in conference now. That's just the best two teams.
Oh,
sorry. I was just gonna. I'm assuming you're excluding Notre Dame from that conversation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I've always thought of Notre Dame as an SEC school. I just want to throw that out there.
Explain.
That would.
Oh, I'm just joking.
That would be as good of a fit as Brian Kelly at LSU.
That
Notre Dame in the SEC is like family.
Yeah. I was waiting for a family joke to come in there because we were talking about Kelly a little bit earlier. That's great. I would definitely leverage the Big Ten like with the SEC. I would flirt with them if that's what it took to, get whatever I wanted. But
sure,
I can't see that working. Notre Dame is a bit too academic in the sense where there's no such thing. It's a very good academic school, but they care a lot about academics, like as much as football. And that's something that doesn't, I don't think, fit as well with the SEC. They're also
hello, Vandy.
It's true, Vanderbilt. Yeah, you got Vanderbilt. It's not that, and I mean, Florida's a great school too. Georgia's a solid school. Like there's good schools in the SEC. That's not what I was getting at. It was just more so how it's implemented culturally. Yeah.
And a joke, but now Texas is joining, and that's actually a really good school too.
Well, I've seen a crazy floating idea out there because nothing has been signed yet, like in terms of grant of rights, that maybe the Big Ten should try to pick off Texas.
Yeah, so everybody up here wonders why the hell the Big Ten didn't go after Texas before the SEC did. And the reason is Texas is never moving without Oklahoma. And the Big Ten is not adding schools that aren't AAU flavor if they don't have an end with an order Dame. So Texas was never coming here without Oklahoma. Oklahoma is not an AAU school, so that was just never going to happen. Like that
just a quick explainer to just the audience because we're throwing a lot of terms out there.
Oh,
the
sorry.
AAU. So no. It's a certain academic accreditation based heavily on research at the universities. It's been to high distinction. Notre Dame is not AAU because, as people will know, Notre Dame is primarily an undergraduate school. Its graduate programs are secondary. It's an excellent school, but it's not a huge research-based school, and that's the one exception the Big Ten has said they would make. What I wanted to ask you, Eric, though, is would you make an exception for Miami because they're also a private school, very good, but not AAU, and you would have a very interesting football program there, and yet a ninth rival for Notre Dame in the conference.
No, I personally would not. I don't know. Miami does nothing for me personally. I would, if I'm the Big Ten. Okay, I'm doing this if I'm in the Big Ten's shoes, not if I'm. For me, if it were me, I would probably rather have Florida State than Miami. I know Florida State's down, but I feel like if they were to get back up, I would rather have that than Miami. That's just me. The Big Ten doesn't feel that way, but I don't think the Big Ten, from a revenue standpoint, I don't think Miami really moves the needle. I think we're seeing, especially as of late, and this is going to kind of get in, I think, into the NIL conversation. They're seeing a lot of real under the carpet type NIL stuff going on down there, and that's not how the Big Ten operates. Even the most SEC of Big Ten schools, Ohio State, does not operate that way. So, I don't think they're really a character of fit.
Can I make a counter argument though for Miami? And I say this because as much as I hate Miami, I love that game, and I love just how sexy the U is. But I think there's a high potential with Miami, because if Miami's banging again, that's a brand machine, right? Just the simple U, right? That's iconic. On top of that, you get the Miami market. And it's a good education. But you are right. The Miami has been secretly one of the worst violators of the NIL rules out there with Tennessee.
Yeah,
so I don't know if that's going to fly well.
No, I don't disagree. A lot. I know from talking to other state fans, they think that Miami is just dirt bag school, and I don't know why they think that. It is a branding machine. I think it's because we went down there this past year and thrashed them in their own house when their own house was like only half full. It's like when they're going, that is a full stadium, but that's another
but they only have a full stadium when they're playing Notre Dame. That's what's so annoying about Miami, is nobody shows up.
They used to. The problem is they also used to play in the Orange Bowl, which was an iconic venue, and they knocked it down to build a stupid baseball stadium that nobody goes to. And then now they play in the Dolphin Stadium, which, by the way, that's another thing the Big Ten doesn't like. They don't like it when you play in NFL venues. The only exception I've ever seen the Big Ten make in taking expansion teams when you don't play in your own venue is UCLA, which, by the way, is the Rose Bowl. So, and that's not an NFL venue. So, sorry, Pitt, you're never joining unless you build your own stadium, and probably will never join for other reasons, but because you're Pitt. But I digress.
I wanted to ask Kenneth a question, just one more about expansion, and then I'll come back to you, and then I think we'll move on to college football programs, so we can have that debate as well. But I wanted to ask you, with the expansion, I think the Big Ten should kind of try to get to Florida. I think that's a big spot for recruiting. I think it's a big market there as well. The SEC seems to be pretty locked in regionally. That's the one thing the Big Ten did with striking first with USC and UCLA, is you're starting to box the SEC in this little territory war we've got. Are you concerned about that at all, or do you actually prefer it if it's a Southern thing, because that's just a different type of football, and that kind of fits better with the SEC brand and culture?
I'm not worried in the slightest. I think it's best to stay regional. If you see where all the 5 and 4 stars are coming from, it's mostly from the SEC region. Like, even I think Georgia actually is starting to become a better producer of high school talent than California is. So, I mean, I don't think there's any problem with staying regional. I think the smack talk is even better since a lot of the fans can be there in person and stuff like that. Because I mean, how many Ohio State fans are there to talk smack to USC fans when they play over there in California? So I think it's best to stay regional.
I it's hard to argue the SEC's regional claim, and you're trying to go national and brag about your national profile when SEC has like 85% of the high school talent in America right in their own backyard. And it makes a challenge. And I know Notre Dame fans are used to having to recruit nationally. It's what they've done their entire existence, but Big Ten schools, forever recruited regionally, and it was fine until it wasn't. And it became a problem. It's why the SEC started widening the gap in the BCS era. And, Jim Tressel, when he took over at Ohio State, kind of widened the gap by like putting the walls around Ohio and being an amazing coach. But it took Urban Meyer opening the pipelines to the South and then starting to go national to really turn Ohio State into what it was or what it is today. And nobody else in the Big Ten has been able to really do and replicate what Ohio State has. Even Michigan, with all of their resources, has struggled to be a true regional or national power in recruiting the way Ohio State has. So like I mean, you're seeing Penn State starting to do it a little bit. But it's hard when you're up here and you don't have that. And that's why the Big Ten is trying to go national and get some California schools. And, to Dylan's point, maybe getting some programs down south does help with your recruiting base. The Big Ten, I think, is more concerned about, trying to get into markets where the SEC already isn't. And Florida already has the Gators in that state, a state that also has the ACC, which will eventually, presumably, not exist in the next 10 or 12 years. But that's kind of where my brain was at with North Carolina, is that you kind of get into that region where the SEC isn't currently. So,
and on top of that, North Carolina is one of the fastest producing talents. Like, they're growing. Like you mentioned, Georgia, Kenneth. It's like that in North Carolina. Arizona is another big one. So these are the areas you're starting to see programs try to get to. And just, because I have to do the Homer propagandist machine here, this is why I think Notre Dame is actually best positioned of any Northern program to resurge and kind of become dominant, not Ohio State. And my argument for it is Ohio State is recruiting nationally because they're a fantastic program. But does anyone believe that an 8-4 Ohio State would have any success taking DBs out of Florida? I don't think so. I don't think they have that pull. Whereas Notre Dame, whether they're 8-4 or 12-0, they have to get kids across the country. The only difference is if Notre Dame's 12-0 regularly, like Ohio State has been, or in that conversation, then you start getting the 5-star kids. And that's why I think Notre Dame is kind of trending upwards. I'm not going to say Ohio State is trending downwards. I'm just saying the margin of error is thinner for Ohio State because I think Ohio is kind of decreasing in talent a bit. Like in the last few recruiting cycles, it seems to be not as great as it used to be. And on top of that, you have to keep winning if you're Ohio State, because if not, look at Michigan. Like you said, Michigan can't break nationally because they're not on that level.
Counterpoint, 8-4 Ohio State, Ryan Day is getting fired immediately, and they're bringing in, I don't know, name your coach. That's one of the best jobs in America, and they will get whoever they want, and you name your price, they will go get that coach. Do they want to go get Dave Aranda from Baylor? Fine, name your price, they'll go get him. They want to go get who's the next? Sure, Luke Fickell. Yeah, I mean, that's a natural fit. Luke Fickell comes home. Sure. I mean, they'll go get whoever it is, and they'll just take right off. I mean, it's 8-4 Ohio State is an absolute abject failure. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot worse problems if they go 8-4. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's if a kid sees Ohio State go 8-4, they're not going to go to Ohio State, but it's probably not going to Ohio State because that whole coaching staff is getting flipped upside down.
So I want to wrap this conference discussion. I think it's been great. So much to talk about. I can't believe we're already 50 minutes into this. Eric, you are the representative of the Big Ten. You are trying to get Notre Dame into your conference. What does it look like for us? Like, what is the deal? What is Notre Dame getting out of this? Like, how are you structuring the Big Ten? What are the benefits for Notre Dame? Make your pitch, and we'll let the audience decide if that's the right decision.
Well, first of all, thank you for your time. The Big Ten is a conference that is no longer the regional Midwest conference that you used to know. We are now a national conference. We now go from New York to Chicago, all the way to Los Angeles. We have other major markets like Minneapolis. We stretch a lot of ground. You will have a lot of helmet games, between Michigan, Ohio State, USC, UCLA, Penn State, and even some mid-tier helmet games with schools like Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan State. You will have your rivalry games renewed with USC, and that'll be a conference game. So that game will even mean more than it ever used to before. Now you're battling for a conference championship with USC. How amazing is that? You now get to decide, hey, if we get to beat USC, we get to go to the conference championship game. Oh my God, what if you play USC in the championship game? Mind blown. Hey, now, if that doesn't get you riled up, what about Michigan every year? I know you guys hate their guts. What if I told you could go blow their brains out in Ann Arbor? That's right on the table for you. What about Michigan State? Hey, listen, I'll meet you guys on Grand River Avenue in East Lansing, and we'll go hit Conrad's and have a beer afterwards. What about Purdue? They ruined my year last year. If you guys just take them to the woodshed and just take them out of their misery, I would not be mad about it. All your rivals are here, man. The only rival you won't have here is Navy, and they're not invited. I'm sorry, but the rest of them are here. For your troubles, you'll be rewarded with $100 million every year. You get it right away. And you will have a seat at the college football playoff, provided you do well enough every year. But seeing how Marcus Freeman is recruiting, I don't think that's going to be a real big problem. And the way your schedule is going to work out, you're probably going to avoid Ohio State every other year. So that at least you don't have to deal with the assholes of Columbus every year. Now, the scheduling format, I would propose a non-potted, non-divisional situation. I would just do a simple protect 5 rivals and rotate the rest of the teams every 3 years. So Notre Dame would play 5 rivals every year, and it would be your main 5 rivals. We're bringing along Stanford, by the way. That's the team we're bringing along with you. So you're playing Stanford and USC every year. So you're going to California every year, whether it's going to the Bay Area or whether you're going to LA. You're also playing Michigan and Michigan State every year. So you're going to the Great Lakes State every year, whether it's to the world's biggest shithole or whether you're going to East Lansing. You're also playing Purdue every year. The rivalries are renewed. And then you get to rotate the rest of the schools once every 3 years. That's your schedule. You want to have the Shamrock Series? Okay, that's fine. NBC's on board with us, by the way. We can make that happen. Every 3 years or so, we'll make one of your home games a Shamrock game. Want to play Illinois and Kansas City and the Arrowhead Stadium in September? Sure, I don't care. You want to go play UCLA in SoFi Stadium? I mean, it's your home game. I don't. I mean, I would personally want my home games in my own stadium, but your fan base likes having those games on the neutral sites and the Shamrocks, and and having the sweet, awesome movie cinematic, jersey reveals in Las Vegas with Marcus Freeman and the Hangover stuff. Which, by the way, that was legit. So if you want to do that, cool. We'll make it happen. That's not a problem. I mean, NBC's with us now, man. Tirico's going to be on board, man. Tirico and Collinsworth. They're coming along with us. They'll just go do the Sunday night game for the NFL. They'll fly to that game the next night. So it's not a big deal. Come on, man. We're all here.
What if we demanded everybody watch Rudy at least once a week? Is that
come on? I'm already giving you $100 million a year. You're gonna make me watch Rudy once a year? Come on. God.
I really appreciate that, Eric. I'm sure all the fans do too. It's such a great perspective you put it in. And look, this is a Michigan State fan, and he speaks very nicely and very respectfully of Notre Dame. He does not do the same with Michigan. And I just want to say, before we transition into Kenneth's wheelhouse here, Notre Dame's rivals and Michigan's rivals are totally different in terms of how they view each other. I've always viewed our rivalries as mutual respect. Like, I've never had an issue with Michigan State. You hate USC, but you love them. Purdue's always been a respectful rivalry. Stanford's a respectful rivalry. The only one that Notre Dame absolutely hates is Michigan. That's it. Michigan's rivals, I don't think they have a rival who respects them or likes them. It's everybody hates Michigan, right? Like Minnesota hates Michigan. Michigan State hates Michigan. Ohio State hates Michigan. And I just think that's a reflection on those two programs. Fuck Michigan. As always, I had to get that in here. Thank you, Eric, for yours. I got to move into Kenneth now. This is your moneymaker here. How about you? First off, just kind of explain to the audience what your project is on Twitter. You guys have to follow it. It's fantastic content because it's super interesting, and then we can kind of get into this debate about where teams stand historically.
All right, the project, it is a massive intertwined thing. I'm trying to one of the things is a programs rating. I have a bunch of different statistics that I have. I assign them points based on rarity, let's say a modern national championship. That's it's worth a modern national championship. A top 10 rating would be worth 1/10 of those because there's one champion and 10 top 10 teams. So it's something kind of like that. That's how it's scored. But I'm trying to just do historical stuff, like posting long forgotten coaches and things that just sort of get buried under the history books. So historical stuff is sort of my expertise. That's what I like doing, and that's what I've been doing on Twitter.
So you've got this series where you're ranking the greatest programs of all time. This is something I've also done, which is why I think we've connected so well, because it's such a fascinating tool. How about you just kind of give us the rundown there? What are you seeing? Are you prepared to tell us who your top schools are, or is that going to be a surprise?
I'm not sure. We'll see. But the whole top programs of all time debate is it comes down to what stats you're using, how you rate them, and that's about it. What I wanted to do was make one of the first things I learned when I got to the University of Alabama was research bias, something called researcher's bias, where if a researcher does a project and they want to see something, they will see it. So if an Oklahoma fan does historical research and they want to see Oklahoma at number 1, they will see them at number 1. Maybe they'll value conference championships at way higher than they're supposed to be, but that's what's going to happen. Same thing will happen to Ohio State. Most Notre Dame fans think Notre Dame's the greatest of all time. Most Bama fans think Bama's the greatest of all time. And I saw that with the earlier, primal versions of what I did. I was overrating bowl games and stuff like that. So what I wanted to do was make it to where it was completely fair, no recency bias, no researcher's bias. So one thing I did, I cut out conference championships because there's a lot of independent teams historically, Miami, Penn State, Notre Dame, all those teams. I cut out bowl games to be fair to the Big Ten and to Notre Dame and to the Eastern teams that weren't participating. I cut out NFL success actually to be fair to the military schools. Like Alabama over the last 4 years, I believe, has more draft picks than Army has in their entire history. Army has more college football Hall of Fame players than Alabama does, I'm pretty sure. It's not that Army isn't producing great players. They're going to that military school to be in the military, not in the NFL. So I only did like the basic stuff that goes all the way back to like the 1800s, national championships, wins, top 10 finishes, wins over top 10 teams, All-Americans, Hall of Fame coaches. And to be even more fair, I used the AP poll from 1936 onward. That's when it was invented. Before that, I used top 10 teams from math systems that go all the way back to the 1880s. So there isn't like absolutely no bias in any of the stuff I do. That was the whole point of it. So that's the project I'm on.
That's so great. I wanted to ask you, because when I've done this, my biggest hurdle is how do you count national champions? Because how you do that determines how your results come out. And the only way, my argument is, the only way it's standardized is if you just admit every claim. Every poll who's given a championship to somebody counts. That's the only standard way. It's not fair because not all the polls are the same, but you can't count claim titles because not all schools have the same standards. You're looking at me funny, Eric. Alabama's the notorious one, but they're not the worst one, actually. Michigan is one of the worst ones for that. The NCAA has a website that tries to regulate it that you can go with. I still hate it, but it's still there. So I did mine today. I updated all my numbers. The gap, there used to be a gap. So last time I did this was about 4 years ago. And at that time, Notre Dame was still number one by a fair margin. That's, oh boy, that's been closed pretty quickly. Alabama is something. The only thing, I like the way the results produced. I think it was a fair outcome. Like, it makes sense when I look at them. Like, okay, these seem like the top 10 teams, with one exception. And this is my problem by choosing the all champions kind of methodology. The Pitt Panthers have 11 national championships, which in my system, as it currently stands, puts them 9th ahead of LSU, Penn State, and Tennessee. And nobody in their right mind would usually say that that's ahead of them. But that's kind of just the problem with this is how do you do the championship? So what I wanted to ask you is how do you deal with the championships and how do you weight it in your methodology?
First of all, don't you dare speak of Dan Marino like that.
The problem with using all championships recognized by the NCAA record book is the NCAA record book is garbage. A lot of the stuff is inaccurate. I believe I've mentioned this to one of y'all before. It has the numbers wrong. It doesn't count all of like the Dunkel system in 2018 rated Alabama as the best team. It's not in the NCAA record book. It cuts out some of USC's championships. I'm sure if I actually looked into this, Notre Dame would be missing some. So it lists some selectors as selecting teams they never selected, and so I find that inaccurate. How I counted them was college football historians prior to 1936, particularly James Vautres and Bob Curlin. They actually know what they're talking about. They studied up on the articles written by the sports writers of the time. They know how an AP poll would have looked like back then. So I used that prior to the AP poll. Afterwards, I used the AP and coaches poll, but I cut out all of the teams that lost their bowl games and replaced them with the second best team of the regular season. So like 1953, Notre Dame replaces Maryland there. So that's how I counted them.
I love that, but my only issue is it just depends what you're going for. That's a bit of rewriting history in that sense, and I think you're coming up with better champions. Totally. There's so many arguments. 1993 belongs to Notre Dame, but that's kind of you're going back and you're picking something. At least what I've tried to do is just what is out there. I try to use. I'm very curious how our results are going to look. I only had one surprise change from the last 4 years, and that was actually Michigan went up. So don't blame me. There's no bias. There's no researcher's bias here. Michigan did well. Eric, I wanted to get you in on this because when I asked you, I'm like, how would you rank these schools? You gave me a pretty good list. I don't know if you have that offhand, but just without doing the numbers, just as a college football fan, how would you rank kind of the blue bloods of the sport? And in particular, where do you put Michigan State? Because Kenneth ranked them a little bit low, I think. Maybe that's just me trying to start a fight, but what are your thoughts?
I have my list up. I have it. I brought it up just in case. I haven't seen Kenneth's list, and it's not going to start a fight because I know that I'm going to put Michigan State number 1, and that's just how it is. So that's just no. I'm just kidding. No, my list starts with Alabama. I mean, and it's not just recency bias. I mean, they have two of the greatest coaches that have ever existed, literally number 1 and number 2. And in my mind, they also have the most national championships. They were in Forrest Gump, right? Like that's the program that was in Forrest Gump. What more do I need to say? For me, at number 2, I put them at number 2, but they're kind of a tie with number 2 and number 3. I put number 2 Notre Dame. Number 3 for me was Ohio State. I view them as right on the same tier in my brain. I view Notre Dame as more of the historically relevant, where Ohio State is historically relevant, but they've turned it on as of late. I have Michigan at number 4. I have USC at number 5. I also have Oklahoma at 6, Texas at 7. I have Penn State at 8. And then to round out my top 10, I have Nebraska and LSU. And my list was not just based on historical, though that was a big part of it. My list is also about what you've done, just your entire body of work. And I didn't just take national championships into it. I also just took into overall branding today as well. So Michigan State is in my top 25, but they are not near the top, if I'm being honest. So
yeah, I think that's fair. And I think the 10 teams you've listed are probably the 10 teams in the top 10. If I were to just rattle it off the top of my head. For the audience at home, I'll give you my list. I did try. It's hard because I'm wearing 2 hats right now, right? Like I'm the propagandist machine, but I'm also with Kenneth on. I hate if my work has any kind of bias in it. I have a story. Like I've done this 1 title per year thing just as a fun side hobby, and Michigan was unfortunately so low that I was cheering for them to win 1997. Just because I didn't want there to be any recency or research bias in my own work. So I'm playing 2 hats here. Here's where I go, and I'll tell you the points to show you the gaps between the teams. And this is something, it's not complete because I only had a few hours to work on it today, and I still got to adjust for Pitt being number 9th. Something's wrong there. I gotta reassess that. But at number 1, it's close, but I still have the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. 10,293 points. For Notre Dame, they lead most or are tied for first in Heisman's, All-Americans, College Football Hall of Famers, NFL Hall of Famers, and draft picks. And they're usually in the top 3 for any other category. Number 2 for national championships to Alabama. Number 2 overall, I have Alabama. 10,043 points. So there's only a 250 point difference at the moment between Notre Dame and Alabama on my scoring system. That will change. Very close. At 3, I have USC at 8,448. So there's a fairly sizable gap there between Alabama and USC. Then I have Oklahoma at 8,338. Just really, really close with USC. In both instances, they're high national championship teams, Heisman winners, draft picks, consistent, a lot of similarities between the two as much as they hate each other. Number 5, I have Michigan. They were usually number 6 on my list, but they bumped up. And I have Ohio State number 6. The reason Ohio State's a little bit lower for me is I tend to value national championships more than consistency. That is probably a Notre Dame thing. But Ohio State has been probably the most consistent program in the sport, but they only have, well, they claim 8 titles, which is less than the others, and by all selectors, it's 15. But that has been disputed as well. So Ohio State and Michigan, the gap between them is about 50 points. So as if that rivalry isn't heated enough, on my system, they're 50 points apart from each other. And then I go 7 Nebraska, 8 Texas. I can't believe Pittsburgh is 9, and then I have LSU 10. I got to reassess that one just because Pitt won 11 titles, 5 or 6 of which were before 1920. So we got to figure out a way there. But that's kind of how my methodology spit that out today. So Notre Dame, Alabama, USC, Oklahoma, Michigan, Ohio State, Nebraska, Texas are the Blue Bloods. I cut it off at 8. I think most people do as well. And I'm ready to hear what. Well, Kenneth, you don't have to spoil it. But how about you critique us? Where have we gone wrong here?
Back to the research bias. I think the reason you have Pitt so high, Pittsburgh is very. They haven't been a very good team program, but they've been a very good individual program. They've got a lot of All-Americans. They've had a lot of NFL success, a lot of all that sort of stuff. And as a Notre Dame fan, you're more likely to value individual statistics over team statistics if we're going by the researcher's bias theory. I got to look at Paul Hornung.
Well,
he had a Heisman Trophy.
To be fair, just to cut in, to be fair, Notre Dame has a pretty strong team success rate too.
Disproportionately, they have a much higher individual success rate. Yeah.
It does help. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so that would be my opinion on why Pittsburgh is so high. I think you had Oklahoma at number 4. Did you value conference championships at all, or?
I did actually. I gave conference championships a fairly decent weight, and I gave bowls a bit of a lesser weight. And my idea there was, not all bowls are equal, but if you win your conference and your bowl, you kind of double dip there in terms of points. So I did give conference championships, which is obviously Oklahoma's strength.
Yeah, Oklahoma has how many? Like 45 or 50 conference championships or something like that.
Yeah, 50.
Yeah, geez, that's so stupid.
To tell you how much my system does not have any sort of researcher's bias, I have Yale in the top 10, the Yale Bulldogs. Yeah. So
okay, interesting.
Yeah,
I did not include schools who are no longer FBS, so yeah. I think I would as well, just because my system values championships so much. Yale, Princeton, Harvard, they'd probably all sneak in there.
The reason I had Michigan State so low, like they should be like 3 spots up, because I also have Princeton and Harvard above them. Yeah,
that makes sense then. I didn't know you were going that way, so very interesting.
What are you going to do? I mean, when the Spartans, if they were to meet Princeton on the field today, it's that's going to be tough.
Yeah, I cut it off at when they left when they left the top league of play. They left in 1981, so everything beyond that doesn't count. So obviously these other teams are eventually going to catch up, since they're not getting any more points now. So yeah, it's only a matter of time. I did have Minnesota way higher than I thought most other teams would be. They were great back in like the 1930s, 1940s, even in the 1900s, 1910s. Have them at like number 13, definitely top 15. But yeah, they have a lot of national championships. They've won, but they've beaten a lot of elite teams back before the AP poll existed. They have a very large number of wins against those elite teams, so they're very much boosted. Illinois is in the top 25, which shocked me. So yeah,
Kenneth, yeah, all that success those schools had were before Michigan State joined the Big Ten.
Yeah. We
were an independent back then, just like Notre Dame fans, just like you guys were. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, y'all joined the Big Ten in what, like 1954, early 50s?
50, 52, 53, something like that. Yeah, that's right. Sounds about right.
Yeah.
So where do you have Oklahoma? Because you seemed a little surprised I had them at number 4.
I believe, my system counts strength of schedule, of course, games against elite teams.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'll
so
knock
they
it
took a
down.
massive hit there. They played almost no schedule of value up until the 1960s. So I have them below all your most traditional blue bloods. I have them below Alabama, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, USC. Yeah, they're not in the top five.
That's fair. I mean, it depends what you value there. If you're not valuing conference championships, which one of the reasons I did give a value to the conference championship is I didn't want to have Notre Dame bias in it. I want it to be like, because I can make an argument for it as you did that conference championship shouldn't really be worth anything. But I was like, that coming from a Notre Dame fan, that's not really acceptable. So it depends what you value. But Oklahoma's a storied program, and I think if you're an Oklahoma fan listening, there's a difference between kind of the greatest in terms of the numbers and the success and storied. I think there's a bit of a give and take there because I think Michigan, as much as I hate those bastards, they are a pretty storied program. They just haven't been as successful past 1948 as some other programs. And I think you can make a strong argument for Ohio State even passing them as well. So that there's so much to this, and I love it. Like to me, it's like a pig in mud, or how the other term goes. It's just a lot of fun to do. I'm glad to hear yours. Yours sounds a lot more professional than everyone else's, including mine.
Yeah, if Michigan, if you like your blue bloods to have one national championship since the end of World War II, that's awesome. Congratulations.
No recency bias. I have Michigan higher than both of you, I believe.
Oh, interesting.
My Michigan was number 4.
Yeah, mine's number 3.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Did you take number of seats in a stadium as part of your?
No.
They love that. That's like their big thing.
Yeah. They were blowing out Chicago back when they were good and actually a major team and not D3.
Oh, yeah.
They racked up the points on Chicago and Minnesota back when they were worth something.
They did. They also racked up points on like St. Mary's School for the Blind in like 1867.
Yeah, I think Dylan would like it if I strictened up my national championship thing. The way I chose national champions, I wanted everybody to have like a chance to split them. If I wanted to stricten them up to like one per season, I believe Notre Dame would likely move up to number 1. Michigan would likely move down to number 4. So that it hurt.
Well,
Michigan
what's wrong with that? I think that sounds perfect.
I bet if you started at like 1945, we'll just say 1945 and move to today, that Michigan would have a drastic drop.
I have one for the AP era, which is since 1936, and I think Michigan's like number 7 or number 8. They're low.
Yeah.
You know what's funny?
You hate to see it.
I consider times number 1, like weeks spent number 1 in the AP poll, and that's the one area Michigan gets hammered in because ever since 36, Michigan's been just kind of okay. Well, obviously they're still elite because we're still talking top 15, but they're not like they used to be. Just to clarify, so you said Michigan was number 3. You are on a Notre Dame podcast. Is that higher or lower than Notre Dame? Because that's going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
You can plead the 5th.
They're lower. I'm joking.
That's great to hear.
I think it's a massive gap between there's like the blue bloods and up to Michigan. Then there's a massive gap, and then there's Notre Dame and Alabama.
And that's what I found too is kind of no matter how you weigh it, there's 2 teams at the top, and we're represented in this podcast, Michigan State and Alabama, of course, I'm speaking of. Although I think they split a title in 65, didn't they?
Michigan State lost their bowl game, but still got it because some bowls. That was actually the luckiest national championship of all time. Alabama finished the season ranked number 4. The year prior, the AP poll didn't, count the bowl games, but this year they did. So the number 1 and number 2 teams, Michigan State and Arkansas, lost, and Alabama beat the number 3 team, and then just pole vaulted to the number 1 spot. One of the luckiest titles ever.
It sounds like you're just jealous.
Jealous of your regular season title.
Hey.
That reminds me of my favorite, Notre Dame history bit is the 77 year when we're playing. So it's the 78. It's January 1st, 78, but it's the 77 season. and Notre Dame's playing Texas in the Cotton Bowl, and Texas is number 1, and Notre Dame's like number 4 or 5, and number 2 was playing like number 4, and number 3 was playing number 5, and Oklahoma was number 2, and they lost that day, which opened up everything. Alabama, I believe, was number 3 and won their bowl game. But what happened is Texas was 1. Notre Dame absolutely blew them out, and it vaulted them, like you just said, over everybody into number 1, and then that's Joe Montana's national championship. So I always love that one.
1970-17 for a second.
Sorry, what's that?
Can I talk about that 70-17 for a second?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Yeah, Notre Dame 11-1, Alabama 11-1. Alabama blows out Ole Miss. Notre Dame loses to Ole Miss. I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, but you didn't have Joe Montana.
Oh, fight!
Ring the bell.
But that's what's so great about the poll era is literally on the 1st of January 1978, nobody knew who the national champion was going to be. You had to play all your games. You were seeing as you go, and then it was, what did the polls do? Now, interesting, the polls were like, they weren't really close. Like, it was a consensus Notre Dame title. Like, both the AP and the coaches gave it to Notre Dame. So it's not, you can contest it on who should have won, but, there's no real contestation there on how the polls saw it. But that could be bias within the polls, right? Because they just saw Notre Dame beat Texas. And as you said, Ole Miss beat Notre Dame that year. That's so fun. And to me, college football, this is what college football is. And I miss that. And I think we're going to miss it a little further as we head into conference expansion, full circle. This has been great, guys. It's been, the best however long we've been going, just chatting with you guys about all college football matters. Anything else you guys want to talk about before we wrap this up? It's a free format here. There's no rules.
Want to debate 1966? Ring that bell.
Well, that's a good one. Eric, do you have a comment there? Because
is that
Notre Dame?
Is that the greatest game ever? The 10-10 tie.
The 10-10 tie. Yep.
Alabama just sitting there with their undefeated, untied season, sad because they didn't win the title.
Again, man, you just hate to see it. It's like, that was back when I feel like, man, it's weird now. We got a State fan, a Notre Dame fan, and a Bama fan sitting here talking about it. None of us were alive to actually witness it, but those 3 programs were actually like the Georgia, Clemson, and Bama of the 60s. Like this was when Michigan State, the last time they were a powerhouse. And I don't want to sit on my soapbox and but it's one thing that State fans do take pride in is like, that was a era where Michigan State, integrated college football. They brought up a lot of black players from Texas, and Bubba Smith was on that team. And that, that really, that definitely helped them become a better program. But they dominated the Big Ten for a really long time, and from like the 50s and 60s. And as a State fan, I hear it all the time from Michigan fans, especially here in the state. I hear it all the time about, you guys are irrelevant and blah, 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 Bo and Woody, and you guys have no history. It's like, well, I don't think you guys are going back far enough. Like, yeah, Michigan State from 70 to 80s and even into the early 90s was kind of just not much. But the 50s and 60s, Michigan State had some really damn good programs and won some national championships. And
they hired back-to-back Hall of Fame coaches, Duffy Daughtry, Biggie Munn.
That's right. That's right. And it was those, my dad is old enough to remember those days. And he always talks about how when he was a kid, he remembers those battles between Michigan State and Notre Dame. And, and I know that Dylan and I privately talked about how Michigan State and Notre Dame's independence and both of them struggling to get into the Big Ten. Really, it was Michigan State not being a religious institution that actually got them into the Big Ten. Otherwise, they would have kept struggling and a lifelong independent, just like Notre Dame. But they, they shared that kind of same independent bond forever. And even after Michigan tried to blackball all the Big Ten members into not playing Notre Dame, Michigan State was like, yeah, you can kiss our ass. And they kept playing them. And, it wasn't until I think it was the late 70s when Michigan finally started playing Notre Dame themselves. But Michigan, that's why I always thought the Michigan State Notre Dame rivalry was special. And that's why my dad, when he raised me, it wasn't as special for Michigan and Notre Dame as much as it was for Michigan State Notre Dame. That's how I was always raised.
That was very beautifully said, and I think the listeners will really appreciate that because it's a history Michigan denies, which is really frustrating because it's like was our reality for a while, and Michigan State can literally vouch for it because they were one of the reasons we were able to stay afloat is we were able to keep playing Michigan State and stay regionally in an era where it was not very easy to travel nationally, which we still had to do. But, you get a couple local games in East Lansing and it saves you a lot in travel. I think that's well said. And I was going to talk about 66, but now I just feel bad, going on about how unfair maybe the pollsters were to Michigan State. But you still have a rightful claim under, I think it's the NFF poll, still gave Michigan State the championship. So you're good to claim it. I won't contest you on that one. We tied 10-10 that day. We'll forget that Notre Dame beat USC like 52-0 the next week, but it's fine.
Yep, and Alabama got a book called The Missing Ring out of it.
Like, who am I? Am I supposed to arm wrestle Kenneth for him? Or am I supposed to arm wrestle Dylan for it? I mean, I don't know at this point.
Three-way arm wrestle. We got 2 arms.
That's great.
Baby.
Yeah, Kenneth, you were asking a very interesting question before the show. I forgot to bring it back up. About our escalation, our interest in the Big Ten is going higher and higher. Your observation. I would say a lot of that has to do with USC. I think once USC joined, there became a shift in, wow, there's a lot more attractiveness to the Big Ten. And then there was the financial reality of it. And then just speaking personally, I got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm ready to go. Like, let's get this done with. Let's negotiate our deal. We'll protect our rivals. But then the report came out that Notre Dame could maybe stay independent if they keep a $75 million deal from NBC, which does seem ridiculous. And then I started kind of descending my interest a bit, being like, well, I don't know. If we can manage independence, there's a lot of bad blood with the Big Ten. And it's more so the concern that if Notre Dame joins the Big Ten, they might lose that thing that makes them special, which is they're independent. Like, it's a national brand. And yes, the Big Ten's going nationally, but, Penn State didn't have the most success in the world when they moved to the Big Ten. And they were a very interesting brand size before that. Like, Penn State was... You see a lot of Penn State retro jerseys at thrift shops, like there's a lot of old Penn State material. And I don't want to be another Big Ten team, but that's kind of what we're wrestling with in a fan base. So like I said earlier, it really depends who you talk to. And I'm curious what Eric thinks on that too, because you are, you're on our timeline. You see all of our Notre Dame fans and friends. How do you view the excitement for the Big Ten?
Like I said earlier in the show, I said this as a State fan, I'd be lying if I told you that I wouldn't be excited to have the rivalry start back up again. I would be more excited if there's a way that they could start that up where they were non-conference rivals so that Notre Dame could retain their independence. But I'm also not naive. I know that's never going to happen with the way that the scheduling works and stuff. But I think that Notre Dame's independence is unique. I've always thought that it's unique. And I always thought that if they ever had to join a conference and their hand was forced, the Big Ten would be the natural fit, just geographically speaking. But geography's out the window. And because Notre Dame is a national brand, the Big Ten is positioning itself to be a national conference. So it just makes sense that if Notre Dame's going to make the jump, it's all right there. I would I would like to see them stay independent personally. The only thing that bothers me about Notre Dame's independence from an outsider's perspective, and this is just me, but I feel like this bothers Notre Dame fans too, is your 5-game tie-in with the ACC. I despise that. I don't like that you guys have to play like Wake Forest and Duke and Virginia every other year. Like, I think that's just ridiculous. Like, I could see if like they gave you like, okay, twice a year you got to play Miami and Florida State, and then the next year you got to play North Carolina and Clemson. The next year, like if you were playing, and then Pitt and Boston College, like if they could figure that out where you're just playing a couple of them, like the bigger ones, like I could see it. But man, they're making you go through all of them every 3 years, and it's like, man, like who cares about like, I say this tongue in cheek because I know they're going to be good this year, but like, who cares about like North Carolina State and Notre Dame? Like, do we need Notre Dame to go to Carter Finley Stadium? Like, is that really, it just doesn't make sense. That bothers me, especially like since that was the arrangement that took Michigan State and Notre Dame away. So I am a little bitter about that.
Well, I can't blame you for that either, because like we are bitter about it. We didn't want to lose those games. It was sold to us as, if you want to stay independent, we need to make more money, and the only conference willing to give us both right now, with like access to bowl games and like a grant of rights for the other sports, is the ACC. And
other sports, right?
At the other time, we just hate Michigan so much. It was like, if this screws Michigan over, fantastic. Like, I hate them so much. You know, I want to play them personally, but it was like we turned that into a positive really quickly. But I'm with you there too. Like, you know how much I love that Michigan State game. Like, I don't want to play Wake Forest, and Pitt's kind of a rivalry, so I don't mind that one. But like,
sure,
North Carolina State, Virginia Tech. Like, we've been to Virginia Tech twice in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And they do the whole Enter Sandman thing, the most overrated entrance in college football history. I say as a Metallica fan.
I personally love
it. We're going there, and it's like they build this up as the greatest thing of all time. They had Metallica do like a video opener for this. They were like, "Hey guys, it's us, Metallica. We're so glad that you're here supporting us and playing our song forever." They got the crowd so hyped, and it's just like, I don't care. I'm sorry. I don't care about going to Virginia Tech and being your Super Bowl in your stupid little stadium where you got to walk 20 minutes from your dugout around the park and then get into the stadium. Like, I can't stand it. I'm sorry.
Not Lane Stadium. Oh, no. Here's a question. I asked my buddies who are Notre Dame fans this, and I know that like there's obviously like money stuff tied to this, but like it's just kind of an interesting posture because I know this gets into like the other sports, and like I don't have a negative opinion of the Big East in basketball. Wouldn't Notre Dame be better served to be in the, I know like okay, so I get ACC has more money, like in grant of rights and all that. Wouldn't the arrangement to have your other sports in the Big East where there is no football, and then you could actually just be all the way independent, be a better arrangement?
I probably would take that. I think the big concern back then, this was before the playoff, I think, and there was concern about getting into bowl games as well. Like the Orange Bowl was a big reason Notre Dame kind of went to the ACC, because we do have a tie-in there. I'm with you. If it's up to me, I'd put all our sports in the Big Ten. Like, why is our baseball team traveling to Florida State? Like, that makes no sense to me, right? It's not football. There's no reason for that to happen, right? But USC is going to have to do that now to come to the Big Ten. So I guess that's the world we live in. But one of the interesting things about the joining the Big Ten is I want to put my other sports teams there. It's such a natural fit, and we're rivals with all those schools. Like Indiana Notre Dame basketball would be fantastic to watch. I mean, it'd be hard for all the Indiana basketball fans, Notre Dame football fans to decide who they're cheering for. But, the same as the Duke Notre Dame fans and the Yankee Notre Dame fans. Not that they would play each other, but you'd have those interesting matchups. And of course, hockey is already in the Big Ten, which was hilarious because we won the conference our first 2 years in it. But yeah, I don't know. The Big East probably would have made a lot of sense, but I trust Jack. He knows what he's doing, and I think that's what we're in store for now. Is he's going to do what's best, and I think we all speculate on what's best, and we're going to find out. I think pretty soon.
I think that would be my biggest concern about going. Okay, hypothetical. You get a $55 million a year deal from NBC, and then plus whatever you get from the ACC. So it works out to what I'm spitballing here. I might be off. You get like $75 million a year total, right? So you get that. You've got access to the playoff. Independent seems like that's a path. Okay, great. My concern would be, if I'm a Notre Dame fan, what happens if inevitably the SEC and the Big Ten does blow up the ACC at some point, and now Clemson's gone, Florida State's gone, North Carolina's gone, eventually maybe even Virginia Tech and Miami are gone. I've even heard like Virginia and North Carolina State might even be like gone. Now all of a sudden you've got like left shambles of a conference, and then now it just doesn't even exist. And now Jack might not even be there. It might be a replacement, because he's retired, but your new AD's left scrambling to try to find a home for all your other sports. And now all of a sudden it's like, now are we going back to the Big Ten? And at that point, I'm sure the Big Ten would still take you, but do you have the leverage then that you do now if you're Notre Dame? Because right now, I think Notre Dame's in a great position with leverage, especially now that Notre Dame's joined. But would they have that leverage down the line if they're kind of forced with like all their Olympic sports not having a home? So that's something I would be concerned about, being tied to the ACC long term, knowing that the ACC could eventually collapse.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think that's the main argument for joining the Big Ten in 2024/25 instead of 2036 or whatever we're talking about, is leverage, because you can leverage a pretty sweet deal right now. They'll always take you, but you'll just be a regular member. You're not getting any kind of special whatever the hell we're thinking of if we get to that scenario. So if Notre Dame is to stay independent, Jack's going to have to feel pretty confident that the ACC is going to stay intact, right? Or something else. Like, there's going to have to be beyond just, can we reach that money? It's can this be sustainable long term? And I don't know if it is, to be honest with you. As somebody who'd rather stay independent, I just don't know. And it's the uncertainty that's scary. But the Big Ten is more attractive than ever. And to the traditional Notre Dame fans out there, I would say, time to make some new traditions maybe. And as Kenneth had mentioned, part of Notre Dame's tradition is independence, but part of Notre Dame's tradition is playing Michigan and Michigan State and Purdue, USC. That's part of it. To the people who want to get to the Big Ten Conference, that's still our history that you're dealing with here. So I'm kind of on the fence with it. And, the more we talk about it, just the more confusing it gets. Like, what the hell do you do? It's very hard.
Well, if you get here, a couple of advice pieces I'll give you. One, avoid Iowa at nighttime at all costs. That is a house of horrors. They also get really offended if you don't wave at the kids in the window at the hospital. Like, just do it. You'd be a real jerk if you didn't anyway, but that seems like a thing that like they take really seriously. And I had a friend who was just went to a game one time. They were just setting their bag down to then turn around and wave at the kids. And another guy turned around, elbowed him, and was like, why are you not waving at the kids? It's like they take that really seriously. But no, everybody goes to Iowa and gets absolutely massacred at nighttime. That is a horrible place to play. So if you can avoid night games at Iowa, do it. The whiteouts at Penn State, This is something Michigan State doesn't have to usually worry about because Michigan State's games are usually the last game of the year. But Penn State's whiteouts are a nightmare scenario, nightmare fuel. If you have to play in that, that's usually bad news, Bears. You're going to find out really fast how different Ohio State is in the horseshoe versus in your own house. If you can get past them in the horseshoe like Oregon did, consider yourself very lucky. That is one of the toughest environments in college football. Trying to think of other things that Notre Dame fans need to know about the Big Ten. Jump around is one of the coolest things at Wisconsin, and that's a cool town. So
we've stolen that. So Notre Dame played Wisconsin last year in the Shamrock Series, and we beat Wisconsin. And as like a joke, we just stole it. Like, jump around is now ours. We've decided that we're going to play it whenever we want, and we're going to jump around to mock Wisconsin. So I'm with you, though. It is really cool. I'm just teasing the Wisconsin fans. That is a neat tradition. And I've heard Madison's actually, like you said, I think it's Madison, right? Like, that's their
yes.
station. It's a fantastic college town from what I've heard. So excited.
Yes, you will enjoy it. One place I need to get to, one place I want to get to is Lincoln for a game. I hear that's a really awesome time, and that's a really ruckus atmosphere. And everything else I've heard, you are not missing anything in Piscataway or Maryland. Those are two places that are like dead zones, no atmosphere. Don't worry about going to games there.
Those are both cities with large Notre Dame fan bases anyway. I wouldn't be surprised if there's way more Notre Dame fans than Rutgers fans in New York/New Jersey. So that would just be another home game.
Northwestern is doing a massive rebuild of Ryan Field. They are like completely tearing it down and rebuilding it, which is nice because that place is a dump. It is the worst stadium in all of Power 5 football, in my opinion. Thank God that it's going to be, if it's anything like their practice facility overlooking the lake, which is one of the best in college football, that stadium is going to be super nice when it's done. So that'll be a fun place to go to because that's always a home crowd for the visiting team, especially like State, Notre Dame, Michigan. When those places go there, it's always a home crowd for the visiting team.
I hope you're taking notes, Kenneth, of places you got to go visit when you come up north sometime. Guys, I think this has been a fantastic episode. I'll let you guys sign off with where people could find you. Anything you want to mention, free range. We're pretty cool here. So Kenneth, I'll give you the floor here so people can find you, especially so they can see how your rankings turn out, because I can't wait. They're going to be so very interesting.
I'm also making charts, so I'm going to have Kyle Umlang, however you pronounce his name, has like a Blue Bloods charts. I'm going to have one of those with my Blue Bloods in it, graphics, with the logos and the stats. So I'm going to be making those and posting those after the rankings are done. But yeah, I can be found at Twitter, Kickoff with Kenneth, at FinderGoat. So, or Finder_Goat. I'm not even sure. I don't care about my own handle. I created it at random. But yeah, I just post graphics there, historical stuff. So that's what I do.
I will say two things. I forgot the first thing. How's Alabama going to do this year? Just leave us on that too, because you are the Bama fan, and the Crimson Tide are the vaunted, Crimson Tide. So how are you feeling about this season?
15-0. This is on paper our best team we've had since 2016, 2015. It's like our defense is stacked. Well, they're always stacked, but this time for real. Like last year, the defense sort of disappointed. It was supposed to be the best defense ever, but defense is stacked, offense is stacked. We got the Heisman winner returning. We got the best player in the country returning in Will Anderson. I feel like we're going undefeated.
I can't even fault you for that. That's that's very realistic. It's great to have you, Kenneth. Hope we have you in the future too. And it's been a pleasure just talking college football history. So appreciate that from the Four Horsemen and from our listeners. And Eric, I'll let you hit your Twitter account so people can follow you too. I think you've got one of the best Twitter accounts for a fan out there. It's always spot on, always funny, always anti-Michigan. So, yeah, how about you let us know where to find you?
Yes, I am E.T. Wall, am I? And I just post Michigan State stuff mostly, but I also like to just repost anti-Michigan propaganda for the most part. Yeah, I just like to have fun on Twitter for the most part, and I think Alabama is going to go 14-1 because they will meet Michigan State in the title game and lose. So Will Anderson is the best player in the country. I just think that somehow he will get neutralized. We haven't figured out the game plan yet, but when we get there, we will figure it out.
Stadium or something? How are you going to neutralize them?
I don't know, man. It's not 2023 yet. All right, we'll figure it out. One game at a time. Talk coming. Don't worry about it.
You belong on this show with your propaganda. Just the wrong team. Thanks, everybody. Listeners at home, I hope you enjoyed it. We got 2 more episodes coming this month, which is crazy since we're usually inactive in August. So that's how much we love you guys. College football is coming. Hope you get ready. Season previews coming up soon. And I'll finish off by just saying, go Irish, beat the mouth breathers.
Beat the mouth breathers. See you guys.